so much of it doesn't work, but eventually you'll start to see the little kernel of an idea emerging. And then as that emerges, you go after it and try different ways of doing the same thing or tweaking it until, again, as with acting and rehearsing, you end up in a far, far, far distant place to where you started.
Welcome to the Photo Mentors podcast. Each episode, we speak to a photographer or filmmaker and find out the experiences and advice that make them who they are today. We do this by asking 10 key questions, the same questions to each guest every episode, so that we can find out common themes and compare and contrast how different photographers and filmmakers go about their craft. That voice at the start of the show was this week's guest, landscape photographer Bill Wald. In 2015, Bill won the Adobe Award in the prestigious Landscape Photographer of the Year competition. He also won Best Seascape at the 2019 Scottish Landscape Photographer of the Year competition. And in fact, his landscape images regularly feature in the commended and nominated lists in competitions throughout the world. And of course, he has been published in numerous magazines. Bill loves to travel and is just as at home photographing in cities as he is on his beloved northeast coastline. And thankfully, Bill's day job gives him the chance to travel and explore new places. Although he may be familiar to most for appearing in over 400 episodes of Coronation Street and 300 episodes of Emmerdale, Bill loves being on stage and is often travelling with theatre productions around the UK. And of course, his camera comes with him wherever he goes. So, Bill, before we crack on with the deep and meaningful questions, we've got a few sort of getting to know you questions to start with. So, can you tell us what was your first camera?
My first camera was a Kodak Instamatic. One of those ones that where it's got its own eyepiece off to the side of the camera. You don't see what the camera sees, basically. So what you see and what the camera sees, what's coming through the lens, are two completely different things. So when you kind of took the picture and you lined them up, what you'd end up with on the back of the film was completely different to what you saw through the eyepiece. But I enjoyed it. It was great.
Things have moved on a bit since then. So you're leaving the house now. What camera and lens? You're only allowed one lens. What's going to be your choice of camera and lens?
I would probably be taking a Pentax K1 II, which is the Pentax full frame camera, and a long lens probably at the moment, 55-300 PLM 55-300. Sort of going out with a camera during lockdown. What I've been doing is I've been doing a multiple exposure project in our local park. And I've been doing a multiple exposure project on the trees, and that I've kind of tended to find that that's the best lens to go out with, and particularly if you're out with the kids or whatever, and you've kind of got about 45 minutes to take some pictures, so you got to make the best of it.
Yep, I know that feeling. And what non-photographic items are in your camera bag?
Well, nothing really. Would be my general thing. If it's not lockdown and I was properly out and about with a backpack, I suppose I would have some sandwiches in there, and I would have probably those kind of cakey bakey kind of bar things which have got fruit in, and that sort of kind of Nutri-Grain thing, or Go Ahead, or other brands are available, sort of own label supermarket kind of stuff, that kind of a thing. Some of that really, possibly some marathons, or they're not called that anymore, are they? Snickers.
It's been a few years since it's been called a marathon bar. It's showing your age there, Bill.
Yeah, about 20 years. But yeah, that kind of thing. I tend, when I go out, I tend to go out early and stay out all day, so I will have something to eat.
Okay, we're going with cakey bakey bars then. Excellent.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, very good.
And where's your favourite place to take photographs? You can take this as a specific location, or you can take it more as a general kind of theme.
Yeah, for me it would be a general kind of a thing, and for me it would be anywhere I've never been. And so I really like going places I've never been. One of the things, and I suspect we might talk about it a bit later, is doing the job that I do for a living, the day job. I tend to travel around quite a lot, and I love that part of it. And I take my camera everywhere I go with work. And so, yeah, anywhere new shocker than you. I love it. I did a lot of traveling when I was younger, and I took a camera with me then, my first DSLR actually, or my first SLR, sorry, which was a Praktica MTL5B, a beast of a camera, and built like a tank. Loved it. And but yeah, so anywhere I've never been.
Do you get a lot of times when you're away working, when you're off set? Is there a lot of time to be able to do that? In terms of, and I guess linked in with that, does the time of day you go out taking photographs bother you, if you know what I mean? I know some people say, it's midday, I'm not going to bother going out in the harsh sunlight or whatever.
It's a really good question, that. I know I've done a lot of telly, but I mostly do theatre, and particularly over the last 10 years, I've mostly done theatre. And when you're doing theatre, you actually have a surprising amount of downtime when you're touring. So I've done a lot of touring theatre in particular the last 5 years. And when you're touring, your working days are Monday to Saturday. But shows wise, you've got 8 shows in a week. So you'll be working every night, Monday to Saturday, but you'll only be working 2 afternoons probably during that week, either Wednesday or Thursday and Saturday. So that gives you sort of certainly 2 or 3 afternoons to go out and get some pictures. So that's what I tend to do. The one time of day that is off limits when you're touring is early mornings, sunrises and that kind of thing, because generally when you finish a show, you're finishing sometime around 10:30 or 11, and then I will often go out and take pictures. You've got a lot of adrenaline in your system, and yeah, it's one of the ways that I do to kind of to relax really and unwind after a show. So I will often take a lot of pictures at night when I'm touring, but I generally have a thing, which is that theatre, as and when it comes back, but theatre can be expensive. It's expensive to go and see, and from an acting point of view, you want to be at your very best every evening. So there are some evenings you're going to be a bit rubbish. But at least you're trying your best, and so I won't ever go out for longer than if I was going out in an afternoon, I wouldn't go out for more than a couple of hours, because you want to keep some energy back for the evening and chuck everything at the show. But I generally think, as a general rule, all hours of the day and night are in play, and I very much do that. Certainly when I'm touring, and certainly when I'm not. If I'm not touring and I'm sort of going on a photographic trip of some kind, I'll go out very early in the morning, probably before sunrise, and I probably won't come back until it's well past sunset and it's pretty much dark. So all hours of the day are in play for me, I think, and I try and use them as best I can.
Very important question up next. How many camera bags do you own?
Why do you want to know?
I find it's just very interesting, because I know most photographers probably own more than that they'd admit to their kind of wives and family, and
yeah.
Occasionally you'll come through the front door, and is that another camera bag? Have you got no? This is another one. You haven't seen this one before. It's just been in the car. Or,
Yeah. Do you count? Are you counting the ones that just have a camera in them? Do you know what I mean? The kind of the things that the padded ones that you know just cover up. Yeah. Oh,
so we're not going no pelly cases or anything hard.
Yeah,
we're going with like backpacks, sling bags, shoulder bags. Has to be specifically for photography. So if you've got like a satchel that occasionally you'll chuck something in, then that doesn't count.
Yeah, I'm not really a satchel man, actually, in that kind of a way. I sort of, so it's either big or small for me. And so I do have a backpack, one of those kind of, I can't remember, low pro jobs. I got it secondhand about 10 years ago, and it's terrific. It's one of those ones that opens on the inside of it, on the, which is great. And I've really enjoyed that. That's been a good bit of kit. But otherwise, very functional for me. And I tend to buy things secondhand on eBay as cheap as I possibly can, that kind of a thing. And but I'm not a satchel man. I just the camera bags that cover the camera. And occasionally, if I'm out touring on a play, for instance, what I'll do is I'll take the biggest, the bigger one, which would fit a camera and a long lens in, but put in a camera with a shorter lens and then stick two other lenses in. So I'm kind of traveling light, and that'll be my kind of my travel pack for when I'm touring and I can only take one kind of bag with me on tour. So that's generally what I do. But in terms of number of bags, yeah, sort of 5, 6, 7, something like that. Not loads.
No, that's quite conservative compared to some of the. To be fair, a lot of the other guys I've spoken to have been obviously people who have reviewed camera kit. So obviously you start to get, you get the odd freebie and stuff, and the ones that are kind of on permanent loan and things like that. So the numbers have been quite high so far. So 6 is, I think, about the lowest so far. That's quite conservative. Yeah,
well, I'm a total cheapskate, so I have as few as I can get away with.
eBay's great for looking for bits because you find people obviously it's such a high turnover of some bits and pieces, and you can save yourself some serious money on some stuff.
Yeah, and particularly for those kind of things which haven't had, you generally get a pretty good idea of the wear and tear it's had. You can see in the pictures, and it's not like a camera where you can't see inside the camera, and so you're not quite sure unless you specifically asked. Unless you specifically ask how many shutter actuations it's had and that kind of a thing. With a camera bag, what you see is what you get, isn't it? And if it's no good, it's still only 10 or 15 quid. So hopefully not a massive risky purchase.
Let's crack on with the deep dive questions. So the first one: what photo have you taken that means the most to you?
I think it is probably a photograph that I took of Dunstanburgh Castle. I'm originally from the northeast. I'm from Newcastle upon Tyne. I am a Geordie. I'm a slightly posh one, but I am one, and I'm very proud of where I'm from. And we used to go up the coast, the Northumbrian coast, loads when I was a kid. And holidays and that kind of a thing. We used to spend a lot of time up there, and I go back there now whenever I possibly can. It's very much my sort of spiritual homeland, really, and my photographic stomping ground. I mean, you asked a question earlier, which was favourite place to take photographs, and I kind of said anywhere I haven't been before, but my other favourite place to take photographs is the Northumbrian coast. It does it for me on a fairly epic scale, I have to say, and there is a feel to it. There's a whole load of history there. I've got a history degree, and it's one of the things that tends to show up in my photography quite a lot. But I also love the wide open spaces that you get on all of the Northumbrian beaches, really, from anywhere from Alnmouth up to Holy Island and beyond. So when I sort of started taking photographs properly, I suppose, which was at the end of 2009, basically, I had about 3 or 4 months in between acting jobs, and I'd been out shooting in Canada. It was a really nice job out in Montreal, and it was a pilot for a new kind of TV show. It was a kind of I don't know, for those of you of a certain age, you might remember Dempsey and Makepeace with Michael Brandon and Glynis Barber back in the day, which was a UK TV show. It was kind of that meets Spooks, and it was great, and we were doing a pilot for it, and I had to wait. I was contracted to wait at the end of the pilot to see if it went to series. And so I had 4 months that were free, and I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do with this time? And so I set myself a project. I set myself a project to kind of chronicle or catalogue winter on the coast of the east of the UK, in the east of the UK, because that's where I've spent the most time, and that's where I kind of thought I would like to spend more time, really, if I had 3 or 4 months. And I got lucky in that it was the coldest winter for about 29, 30 years, and it was brutal, it was vicious, loads of snow, and loads of snow on beaches, which is always interesting because it doesn't last very long, because of the salt water, obviously, and the wet conditions. And so this particular morning at Dunstanburgh was Boxing Day morning, 2009. I just bought my very first tripod. I just bought my very first DSLR for the project, or proper DSLR, which was a Pentax K20D. And I went to Dunstanburgh, and I went to the boulders. Everyone sort of who knows Dunstanburgh will probably know what I'm talking about. And I got lucky on the way, there was an unforecast snowstorm that came in. I went for dawn, which on Boxing Day is actually not that early, sort of 7:38ish. But I was up sort of 5ish and out the door sort of 5:36ish. And I just got lucky with the snow, and it was pretty hairy actually. A kind of a bit of a blizzard came in while I was on the way up. And then, and when I got to Dunstanburgh, because it was Boxing Day, there was nobody else out. There was an incoming tide. I was at the boulders, and I have never seen Dunstanburgh like that before or since. And I've been going there 40 or 50 years. So yeah, that was very much my sort of, the photograph really that meant the most to you, because it was the first time that I'd taken a landscape photograph that I was proud of. And, it's the first time I properly used a tripod. It's the first time I properly used a digital SLR. And I got lots of really good stuff from it, in terms of, it was lovely to be in a part of the world that means a lot to me, in pretty extraordinary conditions, really, with nobody else about. And also what's been interesting about that for me, and I do a fair few talks at camera clubs around the country, and one of the things I often talk about is not sort of ordering the weather to do what you would like it to do, because the weather is just going to do what it's going to do, whether it's forecast or not often. And I guess for me, if I'd wanted to take a picture of Dunstanburgh in the snow, I wouldn't have gone on this morning, because the snow was unforecast. And I bumped into it en route, and it was just magnificent when I got there. But it was a very salient lesson very early doors for me about, don't worry about the conditions, just go, because you never know what you're going to find when you get there.
That's something I can relate to quite well. But normally for me, it's a case of, I'm sitting there waiting for the light for 20 minutes, and then you just think, oh, you know what, it's not going to happen. And then you're in the car, and you just happen to glance out the window, and then you do a double take, and you realise kind of like the heavens have opened up, and it's raining over there, and the sun's low and hitting that cloud, and you've got the most magnificent golden sunrise. And then all of a sudden, from having this beautifully composed shot 20 minutes earlier, you just find yourself pulled over in a lay-by, jumping out and frantically trying to cobble your tripod together and something like that.
Yeah,
you
end up, the stop the car moment. Yeah,
there's a lesson. You haven't just always give it.
Just go.
Yeah, always go, and then just give it. Even when you think it isn't, just give it 50. Wait till just stay there till it gets dark. Stay there till it gets dark, then go home.
Yeah. Because I sort of generally have another thing really, which is that some of the best photographs, some of the photographs that I love the most have been taken in persistent rain, in drizzle, in low cloud, and it's, you never know what you're going to bump into, and it's just that thing, isn't it, of every different kind of weather kind of pattern reveals something that you probably weren't expecting, and in lots of ways, photographically, that can often be a very, very good thing indeed.
Let's go with a light-hearted one now. So what has been your best photographic accessory purchase?
It's such a good question, this. I think probably, and I was thinking about this, I've thought about this quite hard, because obviously there's quite a few, but I suspect my best one is a totally accidental one, which I got. I did a lot of travelling when I was younger, in my 20s. I sort of went around the world and took a truck from London to Kathmandu and spent a lot of time travelling, which is really when I got the bug, essentially, to take pictures, and a lot of them. And there's always an element of travel photography, I suspect, in the photographs that I take. But part of what I took with me on that trip was a towel, a travel towel. And it's because when you're sort of going around the world for a year, you haven't got space for a normal one. You're taking a year's worth of clothes, which is basically 2 sets of everything, and that's your lot. So, and towels are big, heavy, bulky things. So I got one of these kind of travel towels that are super light and super absorbent. And then when I finished traveling, I forgot about it. And I came across it about sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and suddenly realised that it was actually really useful as a kind of thing for, I take photographs in the rain quite a lot. I'm a big fan of wet weather just generally, really. And I suddenly realised it was a good bit of kit to take with me to kind of wipe down the camera. And then I kind of noticed that actually not only is it a travel towel, but it also doubles as a scarf. So I kind of, that's generally what I do, is I go out with this kind of green sort of fluffy thing that is really, that keeps me pretty warm until it gets very wet, and then I use it to sort of wipe the camera down. And then also when you know doing seascapes, and I do a lot of seascapes, that's really sort of my thing, really. And it's also a pretty handy for sticking in front of the camera lens when it's blowing a hoolie just before you trip the shutter. So I'll use it for that as well. So it's one of those kind of multi-dimensional, magnificent inventions that has a purpose way beyond its original kind of thing. So so that would be my best photographic accessory purchase.
That's a good one. I like that one. We're going to, I want to compile all of these into a big list at some point. It's going to look quite eclectic with some of the items that are on it. So what are you currently learning in photography, or what was the last thing that you learned?
Yeah, good question. And actually for me, what I've been learning recently, and because we've been locked down for the last 2 months, is how much I miss the sea, how much I miss wide open spaces, how much I miss Mother Nature, really, and just extreme weather and being out amongst it when it is brutal. And I haven't been to the sea for about 3 or 4 months. And I miss it dreadfully. And I'm doing lockdown projects, and I'm pretty sure most photographers are doing whatever they can to get out with a camera as and when they're allowed, and doing what they're allowed to do given the constraints that we're all under. But I only live 11 miles from the sea, and I haven't been there for 4 months. And so that really is, I'm sort of an out and out seascaper when I get the chance, and that I have really, really missed. And that's what I've learnt particularly. And also this time of year, generally what I would be doing is, generally in my line of work, I would have done a panto. I've done sort of pantos for the last sort of 5 years. And then what I often do is because pantos are pretty full on, they're magnificent things. They're great fun, but they're 12 shows in a week. So you're doing 2 shows a day, 6 days a week. And what I generally do is I'll give myself a bit of a rest afterwards and take myself off somewhere. And over the last few years, that will be, up to the northwest coast of Scotland, up to the Outer Hebrides, and do a big trip up there for a week in our camper van. And this year, obviously, I haven't been able to do that, and I miss it, and I miss it something dreadful. I love reconnecting with, big wide open spaces, just Mother Nature in the raw, really, which you get a lot of on the west coast of all of the Hebrides. And so that really.
How will you take that learning moving forward now that you've sort of realised how much that means to you? How do you think it's going to affect your year ahead?
To get back there at the first opportunity that I can is and it's a feeling, isn't it? And you suddenly realise that it hasn't been satisfied. And I, do a lot of intentional camera movement work. I do a lot of multiple exposures and those kind of things, but it is still no substitute for the raw power of nature. And so I as and when I get the chance, and as and when, we're allowed to travel, and I will be going as far as I can for as long as I can, and to get some of it.
I think there's a lot of photographers that really appreciate and have a lot of empathy for that feeling right now. Who or has been the biggest influence on your photography?
Yeah, it's another really good question, and I've got a couple of answers to this, and it's part the who part of it are people who you may expect. So the likes of Joe Cornish, who who took photos of Northumberland, which is where I'm from, and I sort of used to go to exhibitions that he did way back in the day before I sort of got a decent camera. I think he did loads of work for the National Trust, and he did an exhibition called Coast, I think, and I've pretty much bought all of his books, and the same with David Ward, whose work is magnificent also, and I love both of them in their own different ways, in a kind of big wide vistas versus intimate landscapes in that kind of a way, but they just have a beautiful eye and a connection with their surroundings that is specific and unique, and they will always be, for me, sort of huge influences on what I do. And then also in the creative photography realm, which I've been sort of part of, I suppose, now for the last 10 years or so, I guess your holy trinity really of Chris Friel, Doug Chinnery and Valda Bailey, really. And I came across their work sort of 2011, 2012, and I'd never seen anything like it. And it was one of those things, one of those light bulb moments where you kind of go, this is magnificent. I was doing a lot of long exposures at the time, and I loved that sense of movement that you get with intentional camera movement. No surprises there, the clues in the name, but it's similar in that kind of a way to long exposures. You're kind of aggregating time, you're kind of gathering up time and squishing it into a photograph. So in terms of the who, those are very much my biggest influences, I would say. But in terms of the what, my work is actually a huge part of what I do, and it's the reason why I am a landscape photographer in the first place, as I was explaining earlier, really. And for me, it's very much a yin yang thing to go with the day job. I love the energy around, whether it's a theatre or a television set or a film set. There is an energy, there is a sort of it's tangible, a crackle of energy around it, and you've got huge numbers of people beavering away, often in rooms without windows, so very little natural light, often, whether you're particularly in television where you're on enclosed sets or whatever. And I love that kind of sense of energy. But for me, I'm a kind of I need to balance that with something wholly different. And photography has been very much that thing for me over the last 10 years. The last thing you want to do if you work in my kind of industry is get lost in showbiz. And so for me, it's very much a yin yang thing. It's very much a kind of a rebalancing, a recalibration. And I kind of like to spend as much time just outside with Mother Nature, meeting Mother Nature on her own terms. And specifically, you won't find many pictures of people in any of my photographs, either because of the environment in which I spend most of my daytime waking hours when I'm working with a day job. I tend to go in completely the opposite direction when I have a camera. So I will go as far away from everybody else as I possibly can and just reconnect with planet Earth and what's around me.
What photographic technique do you wish you'd have learnt much earlier?
Now, I've thought about this really hard, and the honest answer to this is none. Because the way I tend to take pictures is they're sort of unashamedly emotional, really. And so I tend to be sort of emotionally led versus technically led. And what's tended to happen for me with photography is that if I felt a kind of a thing, then I've kind of tried to learn the technique to meet the feeling. And so for me, the technique has always been secondary to the primary gut instinct to take a picture like that or to express myself in that kind of a way. So in that kind of a sense, if the feeling comes first, then the technique comes second and is simply something you need to learn to express how you're feeling in the first place. So for me, I've never really felt like I wished I'd known something earlier, because I've kind of picked stuff up as I've gone along, as and when I felt the need to learn it, if you see what I mean. So particularly for creative photography and in camera multiple exposures, ICM, I saw and the work of Chris Friel, Doug Chinnery, Valder Bailey, and read a lot of interviews with them, and sort of saw lots of things on YouTube and about how they talked about it, and I really connected with how they sort of talked about it emotionally, if you see what I mean. And so that, as well as liked how it looked, and so for me it's that way round. And I guess I've wondered every now and again if I might have bought a tripod earlier, but I took loads of pictures traveling, which I was really pleased with at the time, and I couldn't have carried a tripod with me with one rucksack and no towel. That would be ridiculous. So no, I tend to sort of learn techniques as I go along, depending on the kind of pictures that I feel like taking, if you see what I mean.
What is your favourite photographic failure, and what did you learn from it?
My latest one, always the latest one. And I love failure. Failure is brilliant. Is part of success, isn't it? There is no success without failure. And particularly in my line of work, day job wise, a rehearsal room is just full of failure all of the time. There's no getting away from it. And experimentation. And I love that about acting, about what I do for a living. It is just the sheer experimentation of it. The trying stuff out. Let's see if this works. If that doesn't work, let's see if this works. But what's really interesting is after a day's rehearsal, and 90% of it hasn't worked, there might be 10%, 5% that has, and that's what you take forward to the next day. Chuck away the rest. Don't worry about it. Move on to the next day. And then if you keep doing that for a sort of 2 or 3 week rehearsal period, where you end up is light years away from where you started. And if you'd just gone in a straight line, you would never have been able to get there. So I love failure because it's a very beautiful, magnificent thing. It's often very funny in my experience. And you'll try things that don't work, and then you'll have a good laugh about it. And I tend to do a similar thing with photography. And one of the joys, I think, of DSLRs and digital photography is you get mistakes for free. They don't cost you anything at all. And so I often try and make as many of them as I possibly can, because there's no downside. And one of the joys of digital photography and creative photography is you get an instant response on the back of your camera as to what it is that you've just done, as opposed to, when Freeman Patterson was doing multiple exposures and intentional camera movement back in the day with film cameras. He was having to wait 2 or 3 days or even longer to see the film developed. And we're so lucky now that you can do an outrageous movement with a camera and just immediately immediately have a look, and so much of it doesn't work, but eventually you'll start to see the little kernel of an idea emerging. And then as that emerges, you go after it and try different ways of doing the same thing or tweaking it until, again, as with acting and rehearsing, you end up in a far, far, far distant place to where you started, but without all of the failure and all of the mistakes and all of the things that don't work in between, you couldn't have got there.
What are you looking for when you're shooting, sort of particularly an ICM image or a multiple exposure? I guess
something.
I guess it counts particularly for anything. ICM. But is it an aesthetic or is it
no, an idea?
What is it?
For me, it's an idea, and it's something that reminds you of something else. That whole minor white thing of we shoot things for what they are, but also for what else they are, and it's that kind of sense of what else is there here? What could the idea here be? I did a set of pictures on the Clifton Suspension Bridge here in Bristol, which is a set of ICM and multiple exposures of it, because it's such a magnificent bridge, and you kind of go, you know, how are there different ways of looking at this? What are the different ways of looking at this? What are the different ways of coming at it? Is there a way of coming at this which either I haven't done before, or I haven't seen before, or just a different way of coming at the same thing, really? And so you'll just try different stuff out, different hand movements, different exposure lengths, different number of, I do all of my multiple exposures in camera. So just using all of those and just playing around really until you see something start to emerge. And there's one photograph that I took of it, which I suddenly realized as I was doing it, it was just a specific camera movement on a very long, for an ICM picture, or relatively long, about 7 or 8 seconds, using a zoom lens of zooming in and out, and which started to give to highlight the precipice of the Avon Gorge, which is a very steep-sided gorge over which the Clifton Suspension Bridge is laid, and there was just something I was doing that started to really highlight that feature, and I noticed it, so I just kept on going down that route until I had something that that really picked that out, if you see what I mean. So I'll often just start somewhere, anywhere, and then see what emerges and then go with it, really. That's my sort of general thing.
What has been your favourite photography project?
I tend to work in projects, so and if I'm touring, that's what I'll do. I'll just wander around for a bit and see what I bump into, and then start doing a project on it. I did a project on concrete the last time I was touring, because I suddenly started bumping into a lot of it and noticing it, and it's pretty fascinating stuff in terms of the sediment that you'll get on it, and the stains from water going down it, and all of that kind of a thing. But I suppose my favourite project recently over the last sort of 5 years is mud. Which you may think, you know, not the most prepossessing subject for study, but one of the things, we moved down here to Bristol. I'm talking to you from Bristol, and we moved down here about 7-8 years ago now, and I'd been working up in Leeds at the time. I was doing Emmerdale, and I did that for sort of 3.5 years. And that had been magnificent. Photographically, I enjoyed the job immensely too, the day job, but photographically magnificent, because you've got Leeds is 20 minutes away from the Yorkshire Dales. Literally, you can be in the Yorkshire Dales in 20 minutes from Leeds. And the Yorkshire Dales was a part of the world I'd never really spent any time in. I loved it. It was huge, massive, all sorts of nooks and crannies in there, as well as kind of great big, you know, hills and valleys and water, loads of water there. And so we'd moved down to Bristol while I was doing that job. And when I finished, I kind of went, right, let's sort of go and take lots of pictures around the local area. But what I found myself doing was kind of going, well, this isn't like the Yorkshire Dales. And you kind of go, why aren't there massive hills there? Why aren't there massive waterfalls around Bristol? Why, and kind of go, drat, I can't take any of the pictures that I've gotten in my mind's eye. And then you kind of go, well, stop being an idiot. What is there here? What is there a lot of? And then you kind of go, well, mud. There is loads of mud. And that's what hits you around Bristol and the Bristol Channel is how much mud there is. There's a colossal amount. The River Avon is full of it. The Bristol Channel is full of it. And then you kind of go, well, actually, mud in its own way is fascinating because it's suspension of soil and sand and water, which means that it changes its form every time the tide comes in and goes out again. So it's always different every time you go and have a look at it, wherever it is that you go and have a look at it. But also, interestingly, because it has such a large component of it is water, it also reflects all sorts of interesting light from all sorts of interesting angles, depending on what is going on around it. So if you have a sunset and mud, you've got all sorts of interesting shapes and textures going on in the mud itself, but gorgeous light as well. And so I've kind of gone after mud. I've been doing a big project on it the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and I'm not running out of subjects yet. I've loved it. The one drawback to it is it's muddy. So you kind of, it's messy stuff. My goodness me.
You got your towel though, so you're fine. Sure.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm fully covered, but it's great fun, and long may it continue.
Excellent. So one of your most recent projects as well was your Theatres in Danger project, which was obviously based around, the fact we're in lockdown and a lot of entertainment venues around the country are obviously struggling without that source of income. And that's something you're working on as a sort of charitable fundraiser as well. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit more about that and how they can sort of help and how they can see the book and the project?
Yeah, well, the project itself is on my website. It's at www.billwardphotography.co.uk/theatres in danger. And it's a 2-part project. It's a book and it's prints. And basically I have taken photographs of every building that I worked in over the last 10 years, ever since I've sort of had a proper grown-up camera, and I take my camera everywhere I go for work. So all sorts of theatres are part of the project. The idea came about because on March the 16th, this time last year, as we all know, the Prime Minister gave a speech and shut the theatres at sort of pretty much 6 o'clock that day. So at 5 o'clock, I was touring a show at the time called the Glee Club for a brilliant theatre company called Out of Joint, who I'd been wanting to work with for 20 years. Magnificent theatre company who just do brave, relevant work. And the Glee Club was a beautiful show about miners who happened to sing close harmony. And we just opened in Doncaster. We'd done a week in Theatre Clwyd in North Wales, and we suddenly realised at the end of that week that sold out shows on the Saturday, where we should have had an audience of 750, we had about 100, 120 in the audience, and you kind of go, oh my God, there's a big problem here. And so when the government shut the theatres, and they were absolutely right to do so, incidentally, I don't think anybody in my line of work thinks that was the wrong thing to do. It was absolutely the right thing to do. But at 5 o'clock, we had a job, and at 6 o'clock, we didn't. And the theatres had been shut now for almost a year. There's 1 or 2 that have been able to reopen. But in a world of social distancing, theatres, the economics of theatres makes reopening extraordinarily difficult. So even though, for instance, that on May the 17th, on the current timeline, I think theatres will be allowed to reopen in a socially distanced way. What that means is that essentially you've got a maximum 50% of audience capacity in any given theatre allowed, but most plays require 60 or 70%, some 80%. A big musical requires 80% audience capacity to break even.
Wow.
So for most theatres, they won't be able to open without making a loss. And they can't afford to make a loss, because the way austerity has hit theatres is most theatres don't get the kind of grants from local councils that they used to. They still get a lot of grants from Arts Council, from the Arts Council, a number of theatres. But for most theatres, most of the vast majority of their income comes from ticket sales. So let's say 80 or 90%. So if you get rid of that, which most theatres have had to get rid of over the last year because they're not open, then you've got, a sector in real trouble. Having said that, the Cultural Recovery Fund has been the lifeline for the theatre and has kept them afloat over the last year. But interestingly, opening up will be just as perilous for theatres, because there are costs involved with opening up. They'll be running shows at losses, and it will be a difficult and dangerous time for theatres as they open up. So the project came about partly because I was involved in a show myself when the theatres were shut, but also when a lot of theatres, and they took about sort of 2 or 3 weeks, started going dark all over the country. And when it became clear that they wouldn't be opening for a long time, and everyone knew in our business, the perilous state they were all in, and how difficult it is for them to survive even when there are audiences around, I started posting photographs to my Instagram feed of theatres that I'd worked in. And as previously discussed, there's never any people in my pictures, just because it's a yin-yang thing for me. And so I'd taken loads of photographs of empty theatres, and I kind of suddenly realised that they were quite apposite given what all of the theatres were going through at the time. So I started posting them to my Instagram feed. And a friend of mine, Matty Graham, who you might know, Rich.
Met Matt on a couple of occasions, I think, yep.
Yeah, who's a journalist himself, a photojournalist, writes a lot, I know, for various photography magazines, and like me is a Pentax ambassador. I still am a Pentax ambassador, but in his case, he was for a number of years. And he got in touch with me and said, there's a book idea in those photographs that you're posting. And I went, don't be ridiculous. I've never written a book in my life, don't be ridiculous. That's completely out of the question. And he went, no, there really is. And if you'd like, I'll help you design it. And then it became an idea. And I kind of thought, well, in that case, why don't I make it a fully charity project? Because theatres need help. My goodness me, they need help. And I bump into so many people in my business who are desperate to do whatever they can to help theatres survive. It's such an important part of our heritage, but also our kind of community, really. And one of the interesting things actually about being an actor is that when the pandemic first happened, I felt completely pointless, just totally useless. Who needs actors when people are dying? What's the point of being an actor? And what people need at this right at this moment are doctors, nurses, people who can look after people who can make people well. And, but what is interesting, and that is still obviously the case, but what is interesting is about 6 months later, by the time we got to October and November, you suddenly realise, and television stations had started to run out of things to put on television because nothing had been made in the intervening period. And you suddenly realise that there is a point to what we do in terms of living. People do need to be entertained as well as just to live. And it's the same with pubs. It's the same with restaurants. It's the same with music. It's the same. We like to have a good time. And so I've sort of been vaguely reassured over the last 6 months that actually what we do for a living is important. At some level, it's not the most important, but at some level, giving people a bit of joy is a useful thing to be doing. So that's where the project came from. And it just made perfect sense to me to support one of the theatrical charities, and the Theatres Trust all proceeds from the sale of the book that I put together and all of the prints that I've put together go to the Theatres Trust, who are the charity who look after theatres up and down the land, and who've been helping them navigate their way through what has been a very tricky 12 months, and will also be part of helping them navigate their way out of it too, in terms of getting themselves up and running, helping them buy things like clear screens and hand gel and ventilation systems to make sure theatres are better ventilated for the future, and all of those kind of things. And the Theatres Trust are absolutely a huge part of that.
That's brilliant. I will, of course, make sure that link to your website and to the project is in the description notes for this episode, so people can go and check it out and click the link. Okay, so what have you stopped doing and why?
This is a lockdown specific thing for me, and it's beating myself up. And it's that thing that I think a lot of photographers have, which is fear of missing out. It's that thing of looking out the window and seeing the mist rolling in and kind of going, oh my God, I need to be out there. I need to be taking photographs of this. This is gorgeous. This is glorious. And of course, in lockdown, you can't do that, particularly not if you're homeschooling like we have been for a lot of last year. And it's that kind of argument that you would generally be having with yourself of, you know, oh my God, these are kind of not once in a lifetime conditions, but the kind of conditions that don't happen very often. I must make the best of them. I must make the most of them. And it's that kind of a sense of that sort of perfectionist streak that, again, I suspect it runs through a lot of photography and a lot of photographers, I suspect, of that sense of just trying to make the best photographs that you can, really. And so that I've had to have a very long, hard talk with myself over the last year and just accept there are days when you can't go out, and there are days when you won't be able to get this, whatever glorious light show that Mother Nature happens to be putting on that particular day. You can't do it. You're doing, Zoom calls with, various teachers. Yes, exactly.
Sorry, Bill. Somewhere else you'd rather be.
Yes. Have you seen what the weather's like outside? Yeah, exactly. So it's that kind of thing, and just trying not to give myself a hard time about it, and hopefully that will be a learning going forward, and just be a bit more grown up with myself and stop beating myself up a bit.
Yeah, that's a good one. Again, I think there's a lot of photographers who can kind of relate to that right now, and a lot of photographers who have had to adapt. And the light might not always be good when you want to, but all of a sudden I did the classic thing of I started taking pictures of the garden birds because I can't go out and take landscapes, and tried to set up another little project because, can't leave the house. I've got to do something here.
And I taught myself to do starscapes, which I've never done before. And from the back garden, and and it was great fun actually. And if I hadn't had lockdown, I would never have done it. And so you kind of go, there's lots of things here that in lots of ways, it's an opportunity, not necessarily the one you might have wanted, but nevertheless, that is what it is. And you can use it as such, really. Yeah.
What is the worst piece of photographic advice that you've ever heard?
It's such a good question, isn't it? There's loads of it. It's so tricky this, because you don't want to slag anybody off or be nasty about anybody or anything really. But I generally have a thing about rules, and I generally have a thing, particularly with photography and the whole rule of thirds thing, and the idea that there could possibly be rules with photography at all. I just find the whole idea of photography and rules just preposterous. It's like painting or drawing or whatever. It is part of the arts world. And, your Damien Hirsts, your Grayson Perry's, your Banksys, I'm not sure how many rules they've ever followed. In that kind of a sense, it's useful to know the rules sometimes, but also never, ever, ever be afraid to break them. And it was something that, I read Joe Cornish actually in an interview on Landscape a while ago, a few years ago now, but he was talking about rules and rules of thirds, I think. And he was sort of saying, think of them less as rules and more as kind of things that other photographers, principles that other photographers have found useful. But it doesn't mean you have to, find them useful. And I always say, just take the photographs that you like. Take photographs that express what you want to express and say what you want to say. And don't worry too much about what everybody else might think of them, because it starts as a personal thing, photography, I think. And if you're making yourself happy by taking the pictures, that you want to take, then that's really very much first base. And there is much to be applauded in that.
Good one. I like the use of the word principles, photographer's principle. And I think
it's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Something we should use going forward, perhaps. These are your principles. Something that we should use going forward, perhaps, and say, these are the principles behind it. This is the theory. This is why we do some things. Now, take that, run with it, do as you please.
Yeah, totally do as you please. I'll often sort of, just to be obtuse, try and stick the horizon in a picture literally as close to the top of the picture as I can, just to see what
hang on a second. That's taking it a bit too far. Next thing you'll be telling me you hold the camera at a slightly wonky angle so the water looks like it's pouring out the sea or something.
But do you know what I mean? Just to see what happens. It's that whole thing is you just do what you want to do.
When you're scrolling through Instagram and you're looking at landscapes, I think your eyes actually start to become accustomed to seeing thirds, that pitch, or halfway. You see that the ground has to make up 1/3 of the image, then a bit of the horizon, then you've got this cloud up in the top half of the image. And as you scroll down, it's very much kind of paint by numbers. And you stop when all of a sudden you see that, hang on, that there's just a little bit of ground on there and the rest of it's sky, or there's only a tiny bit of sky and that's like a little bit jarring. And that actually,
or there's no horizon at all.
It just
exactly
grabs
right.
your attention very, very quickly. And, when we are flooded with so many images, if your goal is to get some attention and to your images, and that probably a good way is to actually not to do what everybody else is doing. Learn those principles.
Yeah, mix it up a bit.
Learn how to break those rules and when to do it.
Yeah, I used to work before I was an actor. I worked at various advertising agencies for 10 years as an account director and as a strategic planner, and a lot of agencies will say that sort of, learn the principles, learn the rules, but never ever be afraid to break them. Ever. And in fact, there was one agency, I was just writing about it myself for a photography magazine, the ICM, I'll give it a quick plug if that's all right, the ICM photography magazine, which is quarterly, and I think there is a new issue out at the beginning of March. But there was one agency that I didn't work for, but was very famous in the advertising industry, called Howell Henry Chaldecott Lurie, and what they used to do before they did any advertising campaign was look at what everybody else in the category, so let's say it was cat food, they would look at what everybody else in the category was doing, and then just literally do the polar opposite, just do something different. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but it was always surprising. And there's a lot to be said for that, and sometimes you can end up being a bit obtuse if you kind of go down that route, but you'll always learn something.
Final question then. What motivates you to keep taking photographs?
It just makes me very happy. I love it. I just love it. I love the creativity of it, the joy of it, the sort of making and taking photographs, but I also like where it takes you. So I like being out in the rain. I like being in wide open spaces. I like being at the coast. I like being in valleys next to waterfalls, next to, in the middle of nowhere. I love all of that. And so it's for me, it's a nice mixture of both of those things, both going out, and spending time, away from day job and everything, but specifically spending it with Mother Nature, really. And I talk a lot about photography for me being much more about time than place, and that's specifically because of the day job that I do, and so much of my time is spent in a magnificent but very frenetic environment. And what I'm looking for is something, a yin yang thing, a balancing to that. So I just generally go as far away from everybody else as I possibly can, and just spend time on my own. I'm not a big one for photographing with going out and taking pictures with other people. Really, that's not it's not a sociable thing for me. It's very much about sort of reconnecting to Mother Nature, reconnecting to planet Earth, and just kind of getting out and getting amongst it. And I tend to talk about, it's very much about, for me, it's about specifically how it felt to spend this particular time with this particular place. It's about seeing what Mother Nature is doing on any given day, seeing how I'm feeling on any given day, and trying to find a meeting point between the two, and then kind of making it up a bit as you go along. And so I'm a big one for staying out all day. I'm a big one for going out when it's drizzly, when it's rainy, when there's not much magic light around, and just seeing what happens. And one of the things that has been interesting for me is that in my day job, I'm not a big improviser. I like a script. I like to know what it is that I'm saying. I like to learn it early. I like to, I like to have that kind of part of the job nailed down quite fast. But in photography, I like the opposite. I like, improvising. I like making it up as I go along. I like seeing what Mother Nature happens to be chucking out on any particular day, any particular time, and trying to make something of it. So I love that about photography, which is whatever the conditions, however, wherever it is that you find yourself, there will be something happening. And it seems it's up to us as photographers to notice what that might be.
That's brilliant. Lovely place to end this episode. Bill, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to come on. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rich. It was great fun. Thank you for asking the questions. Thank you for asking me to do it. No one's ever asked me to do anything like this before. So I've been, because in my line of work, it's acting. And generally for me, people just want to talk about the soaps that I've done.
I was particularly proud of myself that I've made it over an hour in now, and I've not even mentioned Coronation Street.
Exactly. So it's great for me, and to get to talk about, the other part of me is something I've never had the opportunity to do before. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Cheers, Bill. And that's it. We're done another episode. If you liked it, then please hit subscribe. And of course, we will be back very soon with the next episode. Thanks for listening.